Today we're going to talk about two-player games, and since there are three of us, we've decided to take an artistic approach. The three of us are going to take turns performing noir-style vintage radio vignettes in which we describe the other two enjoying one of the two-player games from our list. Would you like to go first, Dan?
Oh, wow, this is great. Sure, I guess. I'll start off with one of the classic two-player games, Twilight Struggle, a two-player conflict between the United States and the USSR for control of the world during the Cold War. Now, this is the sort of game that is best played with a smoky room where there's two gentlemen standing in a dim light. One of them, with a steely gaze behind his glasses, fiddles with his microphone, looking at his US pin. He looks up at his opponent. Do you really think that coup in China is going to work? If you do that, I'll be forced to use the power of the Truman Doctrine to undermine you. The USSR player looks back, his bushy wild hair only contained by the power of socialism, and goes, "Comrade, I'm expecting that."
See, like, the reason I knew that would turn out amazing is because you can give Dan a lead-in like that, and he'll unfailingly deliver.
I have some skills. One of those skills is bullshitting. My apologies to our hypothetical audience, but no, I'm extremely good at just making stuff up at the top of my head. Not always good things, but I can make something up.
Yeah, we've also decided that one of our new segments is going to be Dan reviewing a product that doesn't actually exist.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I'll do my best.
So yeah, later on he is going to review the fall magic set from 2017.
I have some interesting things to say.
So yeah, anyway, basically, yeah, we wanted to talk about two-player games, partially because, well, I like to think of us as a collection of nerdy 30-something white dudes, despite the fact that one of us is only an honorary 30-something. So yeah, we're approaching that age where, you know, sometimes you'd like to play a board game without inviting over all of those annoying people you call your friends. And so, you know, in my case, you know, I like to play board games with my wife. That's a fun thing to do for a dorky kind of date night thing. One of these days we'll have to have her on the podcast, I think.
Yeah.
Because I think it would be very interesting to have someone on who can, like, talk about board games, who isn't the kind of person who literally thinks about board games, like, every waking moment when they're not thoroughly invested in their work or rapturously enjoying some hummus.
Oh, good. I was going to say, sometimes I'm eating. Thank you very much. Okay. You covered that. Never mind.
You also said board games. I was going to say also card games.
I only say board games to tabletop games. I suppose is what I really mean to distinguish from electronic gaming, which is admittedly something that all of us also do an awful lot of. But
that's true.
I'm actually only into LARPing these days.
Oh yeah.
Get out for this podcast.
No, so we actually have. I've only borne witness to this personally once, but there's a metro park, a city metro park, that has this like abandoned castle in it, which is a weird thing to have in the middle of the American Midwest.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Someone just got bored, apparently, like, at some point in clearly what was the relatively recent history, given its U.S. history, which is... unless you're talking about, like, you know, the indigenous people to North America who
Maybe it was the mound builders. They had a rich in culture, and they may have built a nice castle for people to use.
No, this was just some weird dude who built this thing, and I'm pretty sure he never even finished it. But it's there. And so basically, now it is a frequent place for the boffer LARPers to enjoy their gaming experience.
That is a great place to do a boffer LARP. I gotta say, like, I'm pretty impressed. That would be a place I would love to boffer LARP. It's a castle.
What's boffer?
You hit people. Like when you have like Nerf weapons and you're swinging them around, or you're throwing beanbags at people saying "Magic Missile, Magic Missile."
Yeah,
that's a boffer LARP.
Yeah, well, so
sounds like fun.
Well,
I want to throw things at people.
If you're brooding and shooting rock paper scissors, you're in a White Wolf LARP.
But yeah, so you're going to have your first Gen Con experience this summer.
Yes.
So you can totally go to the Boffer LARP weapon making workshop.
I probably should not be laughing quite that much, but
is this something you guys attended at some point?
Oh no,
we haven't personally. We have friends who have. Like, yes. I don't even think they boffer LARP. I think they just did it because it's kind of fun to make a sword out of a pool noodle.
That's fair.
Like, they're actually really educational. My earlier comment telling you to get out is not entirely honest. There's plenty of people who manage to live rich and productive lives despite LARPing. There's some pretty good stuff.
We'll probably go back on anything we said earlier and say that LARPing is completely acceptable. Do what you want to do.
There's some great Gen Con horror LARPs, like some Call of Cthulhu LARPs and similar stuff they do that are a lot of fun.
So, what was the, we co-ran a game that wasn't supposed to be a LARP, but turned into one. And I, for the life of me, cannot remember what it was.
This was a 3GM game, and this is going to reveal how much of a nerd I am, because I am super proud of this. We had 3 GMs, and we decided to run a game that combined 2 great tastes. Those great tastes are Silent Hill 2, which, to any of our hypothetical listeners who have not played that, pause right here, go play Silent Hill 2, and then come back. It only takes like 30 or 40 hours. It's a fun game. Longer if you're bad at it like I was. And Unknown Armies.
Which is a fantastic tabletop RPG.
Yes, you pause it right here, go play Unknown Armies, find a GM, all that.
So interestingly enough, like, I've never actually personally played it other than this game that I sort of co-ran with Dan. And I have the book, which I've read because I'm a nerd who likes to read RPG books sometimes.
Yes.
And so I honestly think that you would get the most enjoyment out of this game if you play it without having ever had any prior knowledge of it.
That is 100% true. It's easy to say Unknown Armies is a game about weird stuff. It's a game about weird things in America. It is a game that builds a lot on like American ideas and traditions, although you can easily tweak things to do that in other countries too by any means if you want.
Sure.
But we ran this game with 12 players, which is a lot more players than you usually have in a tabletop horror game. So we did it with multiple GMs scattered around the room covering different sections of the city. That we kept in touch with via IM, so we would send messages about what the timed events was, and we actually had air raid siren noises that we could run to do the whole Silent Hill air raid siren. It was a ton of fun. One of my favorite games.
That sounds really cool.
And so I think one of my favorite things that we had was there was a robot android clone of Philip K. Dick.
Nice.
Who had somehow... This was totally irrelevant to the story. He was just... He had been, like, put on an airplane to be sent somewhere, and then just disappeared off of the airplane and somehow wound up in our Silent Hill ripoff town.
Yes, there was this actually happened. There was a roboticist who created a android head for Philip K. Dick, and when he changed planes, it was left behind, and it just went missing.
Oh,
so there's a missing Philip K. Dick robot head, just somewhere in America, out there. It actually might be out anywhere in the world at this point. And I thought, man, that would be great to have show up, because there's a missing Philip K. Dick robot head somewhere. How can you not want to have that in a game?
So we provided, each GM was provided with a notepad document that was just a whole bunch of Philip K. Dick quotes. So if anybody encountered the Philip K. Dick android, it would speak only in Philip K. Dick quotes.
nice.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was an incredibly fun tangent, because what is the beginning to a House of Commons episode without a complete tangent?
Nothing I intended to talk about.
This is our hypothetical audience has now built this expectation. If we ever immediately launch in to whatever the episode says it's about, they'll just stop listening.
They'll know we've been replaced by reptiloids at the order of the Illuminati. You heard it here, folks.
We need your help, audience.
Two-player games. I'll start, though, with Twilight Struggle, since I brought it up in my noir-themed statement, if you don't mind.
So I don't think Rob and I, either of us, have experienced this, and so I've only sort of heard about this secondhand from you. So I'm interested to
I asked
get
a
some
random
more.
board gamer on the street, who's actually not random at all. He's a coworker. What are good two-player games? And he said Twilight Struggle. So.
Yeah, it's really really highly regarded on like Board Game Geek and some other places, and I think it's a solid game. It is as I mentioned in my intro, players take the role of either the U.S. or the USSR and try to gain dominance over the world via their respective ideologies. What I like about it is that the basic play is fairly simple. Every card has two effects. It has an event. You can play it as an event. Whatever you play happens. Things like NATO gets formed, or there's a food shortage. Or you can play it for a certain number of points it has, which lets you do things like add influence to a country, start a coup, based on the number of points you have available. And then if you play someone else's card, let's say you get a Russian action, you play it, the event happens for Russia, and then you get the points. So a lot of it's balancing what cards you play and how you play them. It's an interesting game. I think it's got a lot of fun. It's got tactical depth, because there's a lot of card interactions and things you have to kind of manage. But there's not a ton of specific rules that you have to memorize ahead of time. Most of it's actually on the cards themselves.
Yeah, that's a good feature. There are definitely some games that I really, really enjoy, one of which I'd like to talk about in the not-too-distant future, that suffer from a serious case of the rules are in the book and not on the cards.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I like is their rule book is structured kind of like a military-esque document.
Oh, cool.
So it's like Section 6, Subsection 1, Subsection 2, which means it's incredibly easy to refer to rules.
Nice.
You use 622, and you go 622, and suddenly there is the rule.
Interestingly enough, this is also how the actual comprehensive rules to Magic are formatted.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, they're complicated, like to the level of just being totally bananas.
So yeah, I think it's a fun two-player game, and it plays in, I would say, 1.5 to 2.5 hours, depending on how new you are. New players are probably more at the 2.5, a little longer range, and other players can bring that down. I could see it being played in an hour if everyone is really fast, but if you've got people who like to think a little bit or mull things over, it can hit an hour and a half pretty easily. So not too long either, which I think is good for a two-player game.
Yeah, and so what's a turn like then? Because I feel like even for sort of a slow, ponderous game with only 2 players, I'd almost expect it to be more fast-paced based than that.
So in a turn, you have 7 phases, and the way it works is the USSR acts first, and then the US acts. So in turn 1, phase 1, the USSR will play a card, and then the US will play a card, and they'll do whatever those cards says. And then then you do your second phase, your third phase, and so on. And at the start of the turn, so at the start of your multiple phases, you play one card out to be a headline event, a sort of event that takes place this year, or whatever a turn represents exactly, that has a big effect. So yeah, it can depend kind of just how long you think about things, or how long you kind of waffle on what you want to do. A lot of balances, you have to play a lot of these cards, and some of them hurt you quite badly. So you have to play them at the right time, where you can then spend most of your effort negating the negative effects of the card you played. Rather than letting your opponent get it later on and use it to much worse effect.
Oh, I see.
Because when you play this, like, let's say you have something like the Warsaw Pact was formed. If you play it early in the game, it has its negative effect, and you have the whole game to weaken the Warsaw Pact. Where if you discard it and it cycles back into the deck and Russia draws it, late game they'd be like, hey, the Warsaw Pact is formed, Europe is mine.
Yeah, I do think I enjoy in general sort of gameplay like that, where the cards sort of balance themselves by having a drawback, and then you're sort of relying on the synergy of other cards to sort of overcome whatever drawback you've given yourself.
But yeah, as a balancing act, the way it works is if the US plays a Russian card, the Russian event takes place automatically, and then they get to do whatever they want with the operational points that the card is worth to do things. And if Russia plays a US card, the same happens, but if Russia plays a Russian card, they have to choose, do they get the beneficial Russian event, or do they get the points to do things they want that might be more effective?
Oh, so the event still benefits the other side?
No, the event doesn't happen. So Russia could say, I don't get to play my own event, I'm just going to use the operational points, because the event isn't useful for them at this time.
But then if you're playing it from the opposite side...
It does happen. Yeah,
okay.
there's
the event happens and you get those.
Yeah. So if the US plays a Russian card, the Russian event happens, Russia gets whatever benefits it says, and then the US gets to use those points to either negate the event as much as they can, or go do something somewhere more important. Oh no, Russia took Cuba. Who cares? I'm going to destroy all of Russia's influence in China and make it a capitalist paradise.
Nice.
Could be an option.
So yeah, that definitely sounds like an interesting game.
Yeah.
It seems like that's definitely one of those like solid like geek games that you wouldn't necessarily be able to drag your less nerdy friends into.
Yeah, I would assume that the game requires a certain level of willingness to play a complex, slightly longer board game.
Yeah.
It's not apples to apples or Carcassonne or something where you can just... anyone can play Carcassonne.
Yeah.
This requires a little bit more background.
Yeah, so actually speaking of Carcassonne, like I think that is definitely something that we need to mention, at least.
But isn't that a many-player game?
Yeah, so definitely a lot of the games I think that we're going to talk about or at least name drop are perfectly capable of handling a large number of players. But I think one of the nice things about Carcassonne is I think it is like one of those rare games that is equally fun no matter how many people are playing it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think it scales pretty well.
So yeah, I think it scales amazingly well, and it is also so simple and straightforward that I personally think Carcassonne might be the perfect board gaming gateway drug.
Yeah, I think it's a very easy game. You can get people involved at multiple age levels and skill levels. I also like that it's a game that is extremely physical. It's a game that it's all about the physical manipulation of a little piece of cardboard that you move around. So you really get into the physicality of the board game.
Yeah. This it's very satisfying from a tactile sort of
that's true.
Sort of perspective. If you, in the event that you haven't played Carcassonne, which it's an easy assumption to make because, like I said, it is, I think, one of the best sort of gateway board games out there. So I feel like a lot of people who would be interested enough in listening to us yak for this long would have probably encountered it. But in the event that you haven't, it's a game named after a place in France. And I don't know how much it actually has to do with that particular place in France. But you essentially lay out tiles that have various features on them, including roads, cities, and monasteries. And so the idea is all of the roads have to connect up, all of the cities have to connect up. So you turn over a piece on your turn, and you have to find a place to put it connected to the other pieces that have already been placed, where everything lines up, nothing can be mismatched, a road can't dead end into a field. So you can then place one of your character little wooden pieces on that piece, and depending on on what job you give it determines how that's going to score later on. You can put it on a road to be a robber, in a city to be a knight, in a field to be a farmer, or in a monastery to be a monk, presumably. And so then basically you score based on, if you have your piece in a city, it will score depending on how big that city becomes. The robber will score based on how long the road becomes. The farmer will score based on how big his field becomes. And the monastery basically scores based on how many tiles are placed around the monastery.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing to that is you have a limited number of these people. These meeples, I think, is the term people like to use.
Yeah, that's the generic board game term for these things. I think is meeple. I don't think I've ever actually encountered a game rule book that uses the word meeple, but that's what people say.
But these little meeples, you only have a set number, and when you place them, you can't get them back until the road or city or monastery is finished. So if you put them on this giant city, your meeple's stuck there until you finish the city, which means if you could have scored 2 small cities in the same time, maybe you made a bad choice.
Yeah. So it continuously gives you these interesting choices where you have to sort of weigh the options. Like, am I going to place a meeple here, which is more than likely going to be an opportunity to score points in the long term, or maybe you've placed enough already that you need to have some lying around to pick up opportunities for short-term scoring opportunities. Yeah. So, I mean, despite the fact that it's an incredibly simple game, it gives you plenty of things to think about without overwhelming you. So I think that makes it fantastic for new players.
I think, and I will reveal my personal opinions on board game designs. I love games that have emergent complexity. The base game is simple. The rules are simple to understand. The complexity comes out of actually playing it. Carcassonne's rules are simple. The complexity is how are the tiles laid out? How do you build these cities? So it's easy to learn, but hard to kind of always know what the best choice in a given moment might be.
Yeah, it's like super nerdy Go.
Go's already pretty nerdy, quite frankly. Yeah, that's a great one. Another game, and I believe Andy has played this, is Yomi.
Fill me in. This sounds familiar. There's a chance I might have played it.
It is a Sirlin game. Sirlin being a gentleman who is really into competitive fighting games. And he made a card game called Yomi about the Japanese idea of Yomi, predicting what someone else is going to think. I think I'm going to do this, but I know you think that I'm going to do this, so I know that you know that I'm going to do this, so I'm going to do something else. Levels of intentionality. And it's a fighting game replica. So you play different fighting game characters, and you have to block, punch, throw your way around your opponent to beat them in a match.
So I am familiar with this. I have known many people who have been super into this game and been around them, particularly at cons where they've, always had one of these decks on their person, been ready to play at a moment's notice. But I honestly don't know if I've ever actually personally played, partially because I personally loathe fighting games. And I think that predisposed me to be uninterested in even trying it.
That's fair. It's basically rock, paper, scissors. A defense beats attack, a throw beats defense, and an attack beats a throw. Again, the complexity comes in predicting what your opponent's going to pick as the right option. And then individually what you have in your hand. It's a card game, so you have a hand of cards, so you don't get to pick whatever you want. You have a limited set of options. So you can look at what other people have already done and kind of card count. It's a fun game. It's also direct conflict. If you're playing with another player who doesn't like games where the two of you just try to beat the crud out of each other, probably not the best game, but it's a fun game about predicting what other people are going to do. That being said, you can only play so many rounds with someone before you're just kind of like, nope, we've been playing this too long. I know what you're going to do, or you know what I'm going to do, and it just throws off, I think, your game.
So how many cards are there in the game? It
is a 52 card deck for every character.
Okay.
There are 15, 16 characters.
And so actually,
so it is like a fighting game in the sense where you would push these buttons, except you do it in a turn-based order.
You just give a card. You just both put a card down, then reveal it.
That's kind of cool.
There's no execution required. It's just picking what you think is the right ability from what you have in your hand.
And so, remind me too, because if I remember correctly, when the folks I knew who were into this game were playing it, I think basically, all of their cards were essentially proxied. So is it one of those things that's like a Creative Commons thing, or?
He released the rules to the game and the text online for free. I can't remember if it's the final version or like one of the last prototype was released as kind of like a reference document. But yeah, you can just find it and print it out. It was out of print for a long time, so it's a good way to get it. It is unfortunately an expensive game too. It's like $80 for the base game,
which includes how many characters? All of them.
Up until they just had a Kickstarter for a new set a little bit ago, so now it doesn't. But it used to have like I think 12 characters, so a pretty good set of options. Again, it's the basic idea is pretty simple. But each character plays a little differently and has like a special ability that tweaks the rules in their favor in some way. So if you like fighting games, it's a fun 2-player game. If you don't, clearly it may turn you off of that.
Yeah.
So, I was thinking actually exactly about what you said. 2-player games where you're at each other's throat the whole time. Of course, we have to mention Magic, since we are sort of a Magic podcast, but not much needs to be said. You are at each other's throat the whole time. I think Dominion is a nice... If it's okay to get into that now.
Yeah, because Dominion
it's a nice contrast where you're not at each other the whole time. You can play the game and, you're not, I did this to your... It's just,
Yeah. Dominion, I think, is I think this is to some extent true of Magic, especially if you're not playing like a bonkers aggro deck. If you're playing the Magic control or whatever, I think, Rob, you mentioned this to me at one point about like sort of the various Magic color styles described in a very poignant but abstract way, saying that most things have some in-game effect, but then if you're playing control, you're not really playing the game, you're changing the rules to the game. But I think that is sort of way more on the surface in Dominion. I mean, Dominion has those attack cards. You're not guaranteed to see an attack card on a particular table. Right.
It's much less likely that.
But even without the attack cards, you sort of have to adapt your strategy depending on what you see your opponent doing.
Yeah. But it's like I have to catch up to this guy because his Dominion is building faster than mine, or whatever however you would like to phrase
that. Competitive deck optimization.
Yeah.
My deck isn't optimized enough. It's doing stuff, but not fast enough.
Yeah. I want to do 12 actions in a turn. I'm going to draw everything. Sorry.
No. So
some
I think
people do that.
Well, one of my favorite. This is a thing that I like to do, and I think if you've watched either of our Dominion online sort of Let's Play videos that are on our YouTube channel, which I don't think I can actually tell you the address for, because despite the fact we have a YouTube channel, I don't think we have one of those nice little YouTube like bullet things or whatever they call them, anchors. I don't remember what the technical term for when you have your name and your URL, whatever. But I will post links to that everywhere to make sure people can see that. And I think I have also set up our hosting service to upload our podcasts to our YouTube channel.
Nice.
So there's a chance, assuming that works, that you might be listening to this on YouTube instead of a podcast, which is like Stone Age technology.
In the far future, they will listen to podcasts on YouTube.
This is apparently a thing that people like to do, because like if anybody listens to Limited Resources, for example, they mention that their podcast is on their YouTube channel because of popular demand, because there's lots of people who would just prefer to listen to it that way.
Well, I get that. You don't have to set anything up, sign up for anything, and it's easy to remember. YouTube.com/bring me House of Commons right now.
and if you're at your computer anyway, there's no extra cost associated with it. You can have a browser tab open.
Yeah, all fair points.
Anyway, we should jump back to where we were.
So back to Dominion, though. Definitely, I think a fun strategy in Dominion is the deck that lets you cycle your entire deck every turn.
Yes.
That is so just satisfying in like a primal way.
So I cannot remember if this is a card that has been in any of the games that we've played, but I think one of my favorite cards, is it from Seaside maybe, is Laboratory? The one where it's +2 cards, +1 action.
Oh, that's nice.
I don't think that's from Seaside. I think it might be from the base set.
Oh, is that base set?
I think it is.
Okay.
But yeah, that's great for deck cycling. You just have so many cards.
So yeah,
I want to buy all of them.
If you can figure out how to trash your starting coppers and estates, and then just load up with high value treasure cards, and only the highest value VP cards, if that's colonies or provinces, like you're almost guaranteed, if you play it right, to be able to cycle through your entire deck.
Yeah, it's pretty effective. I will also say there's also the range of co-op games. So we've talked about games where you don't have direct conflict. What about games where you're working together?
So yeah, I think these are interesting. I enjoy co-op games a lot. And I think this is actually something, now that you mention it, Dan, I don't know why this has never occurred to me. We should do like a co-op game episode in the future, I think. Yeah. Because I love co-op games. I think there's some serious downsides to them. I think particularly one thing that can happen in a co-op game is if you have one person who's kind of a little overly aggressive, they can sort of essentially take over everybody's turn, and it sort of becomes a one-player game where it's that person. But if you can avoid that, like, I really enjoy cooperative games. So, but what were you thinking of?
I was thinking Pandemic, of course, is a classic one for the co-op game setup, and it works pretty well with 2 players, I think.
I've never played, I think, with fewer than, 4 players for Pandemic, because I don't know, I feel like... So are you talking about, is each player controlling multiple characters?
You can just have 2. I mean, you have to take out the character, the operations manager, who lets you move other people around.
Oh, because I think that's my favorite character.
Yeah, okay, well, don't play your favorite character. Don't play the bard of the game. Brings back to D&D.
Hey,
but
I routinely play bards in D&D. Thank you very much.
Get off this podcast. Again, nothing wrong with bards. But it tweaks how the game plays in terms of how fast you can move around and draw cards. I think it's actually a little easier with 2 players than with 4, just because you're drawing fewer infections and epidemics, so you can more easily build up a big hand.
I suppose that's fair.
But it's a lot of fun. Flashpoint is a firefighter-based game. That's the similar idea.
I want to say I've heard of this, but I've never played it.
A friend of mine picked it up, a while back now. Because he enjoyed a good co-op game, and he liked to play them not just with a couple friends, but with his family, because it was something they could all play together and enjoy some time. And he got Flashpoint because it was a new one for him, and I played it a couple times, and it was fun. It's, again, your firefighters trying to run around and put out the fire and rescue all the people, which is a nice one. Were there any you were thinking of in terms of that? That good co-op 2-player?
No, I haven't really given a lot of thoughts to 2-player games for co-op. In terms of my personal collection, I think I only own 1 cooperative game, and that's Ghost Story.
Oh yeah, that's good.
Ghost Story.
I feel like Ghost Story works with 4 people, and despite the fact there are rules for 2 or 3 players, it just doesn't work. I don't think.
It does throw the balance off. So I guess we can move on from that then. Let's not talk about games that aren't.
I have one more. I have also cooperatively played Arkham Horror, which is a many-player game, distinctly not 2 players. Or maybe you can do 2 players. I don't know. But it was a lot of fun.
Good.
Yeah,
running around the map and talking about strategy with other people.
Yeah, I know we've played several games with Dan and I and some of our other friends. Was that Arkham Horror?
Arkham Horror is the best board game that takes 2 hours to set up.
Yeah.
Because you have 30 decks of cards, you have to shuffle separately and lay out. It's don't get me wrong, I like Arkham Horror, but you don't play Arkham Horror quickly. That is an event.
Oh yeah, no, definitely.
You light candles, you have a party, you announce everyone. That being said, it has led to my favorite character, Ashcan Pete, the hobo in that game.
Was that the game where we figured out how to defraud the Bank of Arkham?
Yes, actually. Because but we had earlier that night, in an extremely long night of gameplay, we had played Last Night on Earth, which is a zombie survival co-op-y game. And in that game, there's a hobo who found a shotgun and a dog and proceeded to go around killing zombies, and he survived to the end. We then played Arkham Horror right afterwards, in which one of the characters is a hobo with a dog. In this case, he didn't have a shotgun, he had a magical box that was a portal to other worlds. But nonetheless, we just imagine this poor hobo leaves a zombie apocalypse, gets to this town's finally, I just found a place to rest. I'm tired of these undead. Oh no, horrible monstrosities from beyond space and time. Old Pete's gotta solve this again. Come on, Bessie, let's go.
Yeah, that was an enjoyable evening, I think.
Yeah. Arkham Horror, I think, can be played with 2 players. It's a different experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, in the world of games that are sort of optimized for 2 players, though, I don't know. I personally don't think there's any, cooperative games that immediately, come into my head.
Yeah, I think there's ones that can be done that way. I just don't know, how sometimes it changes the balance. I will mention one I do want to talk about.
Actually, but before you launch into that, I just want to backpedal for a second, because just one thing about Dominion that I kind of want to throw out there is that depending on who you ask, 2 players is the best number of players for Dominion, or 3 players is the best number of players for Dominion. And I think it comes down to, like, people who play Dominion to have fun, like the 3-player game. And I think there's something to be said for that, because when you have the 3-player game, I feel like there's more sort of politics and bluffing, as opposed to you can count the number of provinces that are left in the province pile and figure out who's ahead. But the apparently, like, for the hardcore Dominion strategy wonks, 2-player is the only way to go, because for them, the enjoyment is building that streamlined, optimized Dominion deck that can dig through to find that gold to buy those provinces as quickly as possible. So I feel like it sort of depends on where you're coming from, what you enjoy about Dominion, that determines whether or not that is the 2-player game for you in particular. I think I see it both ways. I really enjoy it as a 2-player game. I really enjoy it as a 3 or 4-player game. I just feel like those are different experiences.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, at least in a strategy sense, the 2-player game is a more constrained area, which means you can more effectively build a deck that is effective. When you have like 3 or 4 players, you have weird things like someone else gives you a curse, and suddenly you have to track 2 other players and whatever dumb stuff they're doing. Like, oh, I'm going to buy this card that isn't useful for my deck, but just because everyone else buys it. It seems nice. And then your whole strategy's thrown out because now they bought the last version of that card and you really wanted it.
So another thing that I think sort of makes the 3 or 4 player Dominion game interesting, though, is like when there's a card, like Swindler or Witch or something like that. If the other 2 people have both bought like 2 or 3 copies of that card, I feel like you can safely take a step back and just leave it alone, because so Witch is draw 2 cards, each other player takes a curse, I think.
I think so.
And so there's other card draw cards out there, and unless that is the only one on the table, you can let them go after it. There's going to be 2 people playing Witch. So there's not going to be one person at the table who isn't going to be getting any curses at all. And then you can pick another card draw action card that doesn't lose half of its effectiveness when the curse pile runs empty.
That's fair.
I feel like I've gotten really good mileage out of doing that. Maybe this is one of those, like, selective memory things where I remember the times that this led to my ultimate victory and have conveniently forgotten the times that this lost me the game. But I don't know.
I think it depends how well you can deal with curses. If you have a way to do trashing, sure, you'll trash the curses later on. If you have no way to get rid of them, it does matter a bit more.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's a good point. I want to mention a game, Fealty.
I don't think I've ever even heard of this.
It's from Asmodee Games, not Asmodee, Asmodee. And they're a small game company, and Fealty is a territory control.
I believe they also made Ghost Stories, which we've already mentioned.
They may have, yeah. I can't remember. So this game is a game that scales between 2 and 4 players. You have a set number of pieces, each of which takes control of certain types of territory around it. You have your 3 basic types of territory. You have fields, forests, and roads. And cities. Cities are an addition, so you can have a forest city. Or a forest road city, because the city's on a road. So you have territory. These pieces take control of different ones, and they basically are played, and then you play all your pieces, and then you trigger them and actually see what you take control of. So when you place in reverse numerical order. You and the other player both put a card face down, you reveal, and whoever card has a lower number goes first. The lower numbers tend to claim less territory, but are faster. The higher numbers tend to claim more territory, but are slower. And then at the end of the game, all the low numbers trigger, so your 10 triggers, then your 20, then your 30, and so on. which means a lot of the game is about strategically placing your pieces to block area of effect. Because if you claim the territory first, they can't use it.
Interesting.
So again, it's the basic rules are fairly simple, but the complexity of what's the best thing to play, how do I move around, and then whenever you play, you can't play again into the same row or column you've played in. So your little pieces are placed out in this row and column of points.
And are you allowed to... So you're allowed to type... Okay, so one place is 1 point on this grid.
Yes, you put your piece onto a point of this grid.
And you're allowed to multiply type this grid? Give it Forest Road?
Yep, except it already has these types. So you basically get you get a set of boards that you can assemble and flip over to build your grid for this game.
Nice.
And then you place onto it to figure out what is the optimal placement.
Nice.
It's sort of like Settlers of Catan in that you can have it different placements based on how you arrange the boards together. So I think it's a fun game. It scales incredibly well between 2 and 4 players. It's a great 2-player game. It's a great 4-player game because the board gets bigger with more players. You add more slots to the board, which I think works. Yeah, I think works really well. It's a fun game, and probably one of my favorite territory control games. It plays in under 40 minutes if you know what you're doing.
Oh, that's nice.
So it can be really fast. Another one from the same company that 2-player is kind of debatable, sometimes works, is Flowerfall. But I want to mention it because it's another one of those, like Carcassonne, it's a very kinematic physical game. You have a deck of cards that have flowers on them. One side has flowers that have colors, your colors. The other side has green flowers that are worth points. You put a couple cards out to start these gardens, and then you have to stand up, and standing height above a table, you have to drop your cards down onto the existing cards to build patches of garden by connecting the green parts. And not the stones, the stone parts of the cards.
What was the name of this game?
Flowerfall.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds interesting, but I'm going to be honest and say I personally hate dexterity games.
That's because you're clumsy. It's fair. It is a dexterity game. It's fun with 2 players. I think you can do it, but I will have to say I must admit I think it's better with more players because the more people you have dropping cards, the crazier it gets. But
because there's some folks local to where I'm currently living. Well, I think most of them have since moved, and I'm still here. But they were like huge into Jungle Speed, which is a pattern matching game where you reveal cards, and if you see the pattern, you punch someone in the face. There's actually this marker that sits in the middle of the table, and you have to grab it when you see the thing. But let's be real. The end result is you punch someone in the face.
This is the many fists moving towards the middle noise.
I like this game. Wait, am I the best player at the table? If so, I like this game. If I'm not the best player and the other players are significantly bigger and stronger than me, I don't like this.
Yes, I will say I rue might be the right word when my cousins pull out the deck at family parties. Egyptian rat screw time. No, don't make me. No reaction times, please.
Yeah. This is basically Egyptian rat screw, except you actually have to like grab this magical idol that sits in the middle of the table. And
allow me to offer a counterpoint. I've won games like that not because of my physical speed, but because of my verbal speed. If you can say enough funny things that the other people are too busy laughing or paying attention to whatever nonsense comes out of your mouth, you can distract them. It's basically using a social challenge to defeat their physical abilities.
Using the multiple tracks in your brain to make their tiny little brains be distracted while you reach in faster than they can.
I knew Mind 1 was the best mage sphere, and this proves it.
Oh no, come on. Entropy all the way.
Boy, do I not know what you guys are talking about.
It's better. It is significantly better that we don't get into discussion of mage. We'll go into a flame war, and we'll start talking incomprehensible 3-letter acronyms.
All right.
Yeah. In terms of pure 2-player games, I believe you've played Dragons of Kier, though, right?
Is that the? I think
the little.
Assuming I'm thinking of the right game, then yes.
The little paper dragons that move around, and you place a tile that like redirects them when it hits it.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm thinking. I was thinking of a different game, but now I know which game you're talking about, and yes, I own a copy.
Yes, Dragons of Kier is a straight 2-player game. You can only play it with 2 players.
Okay, no, then I'm not thinking of the same game. I have no idea what you're talking about.
You have 2 players. And they each have a little hut that is their defense, and there's dragons that move around, and if they hit your hut, you die.
Okay.
So every turn you place a tile, and your tile the dragon hits it and moves at a 90-degree angle, or it moves at 180 degrees and goes back the way it came.
So I have played this game several times on one particular evening, which was one of the few chances I got to go back and visit my college gaming group after I moved out of my college town, where the gaming group had a copy of this game. One of my friends offered to show me the game and play against me, and I beat him. And this was apparently like a big deal, because apparently nobody beats Damien at Dragons of whatever it's called.
Kier.
And also, I just remembered what the other game I was thinking of is called, and it's Suro.
Oh, yes, that's another game about dragons, and a different one.
Which you can play with 2 players, and I think it's kind of fun, but I think it's more fun with a group.
Yes, Suro is a fun game, but yeah, not the same. Yeah, Dragons of Kier is a good one. What about worker placement games and 2-player versions?
Like Puerto Rico?
Or Agricola.
Yeah, I am not...
Lords of Waterdeep?
I'm not that experienced in the world of Agricola. I feel like that's like the quintessential like nerdy game. Like, if anybody has been watching Season 3 of Orphan Black, like, they have been making jokes about how nerdy Agricola is. Huh. Like, on BBC Canada, apparently. But I have not played that nearly as much as my visible nerd cred would lead one to believe. Puerto Rico, however, is easily one of my favorite board games.
Unfortunately, does not come in 2-player edition.
No,
it does
3,
not.
4, 5.
Yeah.
Agricola does, and it works out. In fact, they have a 2-player version specifically, which, if I recall the name of it, is All the Animals Big and Small, which I'm going to have to look up.
Well, so while you're looking that up, just to go on a weird Puerto Rico tangent, there was a card game version of Puerto Rico that I believe was called the San Juan. I've never personally played it, but it was designed by the same people who designed Puerto Rico. And then after San Juan, they produced another game called Race for the Galaxy. That is apparently the game that they wanted to make when they made San Juan. And so there are special 2-player rules for Race for the Galaxy.
Which we did a bit of experimenting with.
Yeah, I had never played before, but like a couple weekends ago, I think I drug Rob over here to try them out. I was expecting them to be a little more complicated, given all of the warnings in the rulebook about how this is for, advanced players. Really, I don't think it's remarkably advanced. It's basically the regular rules, which, it is very much like Puerto Rico, a game where you pick a job, or in this case, it's just a game phase.
Yeah.
So you pick a game phase, and...
Pick a phase, only the picked phases occur.
And there's a specific order in which those occur. So everybody picks their phases at the same time and then reveals them at the same time. And so then with the special 2-player rules, basically the difference is each player, instead of picking a phase, picks 2. And you can pick the exact same phase twice, and some of them this has weird interactions.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the only thing that could possibly be considered particularly advanced, is the way the double phases interact with each other, should you pick those.
But it was very fun. It worked
quite
well.
I feel like it was a really great, solid 2-player game, particularly because I think for a phase-choosing game like Race for the Galaxy, one of the things that sort of makes the game interesting is sort of you're kind of psychographically projecting, what choices are my opponents going to make.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm watching what they're doing, and I'm thinking, okay, I think based on what they've been doing that they're likely to pick this particular phase, which would be to my advantage. I would very much like that phase to happen next round, but it would work out even better for me if this phase also happened in addition to that. So I'm going to pick that phase and hope that they do what I'm predicting their behavior to be.
And occasionally they do, but most of the time they picked exactly the same phase that you did.
It is possible to outguess yourself.
Yes, absolutely. But no, I think it was a lot of fun.
So yeah, and the nice thing about each player picking 2 phases is it maintains that sort of thing, where you're thinking oh, okay, I think one of their phases is likely to be this particular phase that I'm sort of banking on for my strategy, them choosing that, so I can also choose these other things to make the whole thing go off. And so that I have to give it a solid score for that. The downside to Race for the Galaxy, that one of the obnoxious sort of game traits we mentioned earlier, is the rules are in the book and not on the cards.
Yes.
So Race for the Galaxy is 100% straightforward, assuming you have memorized every single one of the weird symbols on the cards. And
you do that, right? I mean, that's just a thing
Andy
you do.
Does, but the most of us mortals. No, I'm kidding.
But yeah, if I've managed to memorize those symbols, that is actually because that one of the nice things about Race for the Galaxy is, despite the fact it's a big game, it packs very small.
Yeah. Because
it's 100% cards, except for enough victory point tiles that will fit in a Ziploc baggie. So basically, I decided once when I was traveling for work to go out to do field work in the middle of nowhere, where our field work happens, I was going to pack some games. And I'm I'm going to pack Race for the Galaxy, because I can just pack the cards and a Ziploc bag full of victory point tiles. And so I played lots and lots of Race for the Galaxy on one particular work-related trip, where one of our coworkers, who I think plays the fewest board games of all of us, managed to solidly beat us most of the time. So I think one of these days, I'm convinced that we need to get Danielle to come to a board game night, just to see if she can maintain her status as Race for the Galaxy champion. She's also one of the only 5 people who listens to this podcast, so hi.
What I want to say is, the impressive part about all of this is, when going to the middle of nowhere, you look at, what are the essentials I need? What are the things I cannot live without? And the answer is board games, food, water, board games. That's where it is. Do you need more socks or clothes? Board games!
If you have board games, people will hang out with you and give you food, water, and socks.
Good to know.
So
zombie apocalypse prep kit.
Exactly.
I
bring Puerto Rico.
I work for a group that contains many international collaborators. So a huge number of them are European. So I've adopted some Europeanness through osmosis. So basically now, anytime I travel for business, I only pack like a pair of pants and 2 V-neck t-shirts.
Do you also wear black socks with your sandals?
No, but our boss does.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Speaking of Europeanisms,
Right. So
I want to.
anyway, Dan, did you have any other games that?
I did have one more game I wanted to mention.
Okay.
And this is a game that is 2 to 4 players, but I think is terrible with more than 2 players.
Interesting. I'm now intensely curious.
It is called Shadow over Innsmouth. It is a Lovecraftian themed game.
Well, yeah, that is in fact a Lovecraftian story.
Yeah. Where you play, one player plays the human who is trapped in Innsmouth. And the other players play the deep ones, the hideous fish mutant monsters, who are trying to catch him. The problem is the deep ones work together. So if you have like 3 deep one players, they're just strategizing together, where you could just have 2, the deep ones and the human, and it becomes a clash between 2 people. I think it makes it much more pure and interesting. Suddenly you don't have to worry about it's just horrible monstrosities, plucky human underdog. So I think I think actually with 2 players it's a more interesting game.
That is interesting. I'm trying to think of any other games where it's like it's designed as a multiplayer sort of thing, but is just more interesting with fewer players. And we've already sort of talked about the difference between many player and 2-player Dominion, and that's really the only other thing I can think of.
So this may qualify as one of those games, but we have no confirmation because I've never played it with more than 2 people. Wings of War, which I think has a weird and preface, it's a dogfighting board game.
Okay.
N players.
Wings of War, haven't you, Dan?
Where N is as many people as you can manage to have as a table.
I haven't actually. I have not played Wings of War.
Oh, okay.
So I'm listening intensely on this. I'm interested.
So when I was presented with how do you do a dogfighting board game, I thought that, that there's a lot of, like, how do you move these planes around? And they actually have little movement cards and movement speeds. You essentially lay these movement cards on the table and move your plane according to them. You have to be thinking a turn ahead of your opponent. You plan 2 turns. And so when the thing is happening that happened a turn ago, you are planning for a turn 2 ahead of it. Yeah.
That's cool.
I think with 2 people you get kind of the classic dogfighting dance of, how am I going to get behind this person? And it's, I think intimate is the right word, that you're like predicting people's actions and you're like really getting in each other's heads. It's like it's constantly the scene from Top Gun where the American pilot is flicking off the Russian pilot because their cockpits are so close. Except in this one, it's because you both mismaneuvered and were trying to shoot at each other. And,
now I'm stuck. I just have Danger Zone playing in my head constantly. Now I'm just like, I keep thinking Highway to the Danger Zone, and now I owe Kenny Loggins like $5 for copyright infringement.
So you're thinking of Danger Zone and not that sexy volleyball scene?
No, I could be thinking of Mighty Wings or Through the Fire, because I used to own the Top Gun soundtrack and listen to it.
But yeah, so I'll say about Wings of War that, I definitely think it's an interesting 2-player game for the reasons Dan mentioned. I think that playing with more than one
I mentioned a reason. I thought Rob mentioned
Rob, but it's okay.
I like
you both have monosyllabic names.
I like getting credit for these things. Dan did all this work. And Rob just looks really sad.
But yeah, for the reasons Rob mentioned, it is an interesting, fun 2-player game. I personally think that it's different. I don't know if it's more or less fun with multiple players. And the reason I think it's sort of enjoyable is because I, personally, when I play with, 2 players on a side or whatever, I force people on the same side to not collaborate with one another. Because, it's a dogfighting game. We're talking about,
Didn't they have radios, though?
but we're talking dogfighting, split second.
Yeah, that's true.
Like you don't have time to like strategically chat, particularly when you're in like a piston-powered World War II aircraft.
And it's also not the kind of thing where your buddy being like, Andy, there's a bogey on your tail is actually going to help you. You can see it. It's a board game.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, actually, there is one other game I definitely want to talk about. This is going to be a bit of a long episode, I think. It turns out that we have tons of things to say on this topic, apparently. But it's sort of in general, one thing I kind of want to mention is miniatures.
Oh, I was gonna say we didn't talk at all about minis games, so a whole nother topic. Yeah,
I mean, this is just like I don't want to get into any like one specific miniatures game.
Dreamblade.
Oh, my example was going to be that 40-pound copy of Ogre Designers Edition.
Oh, yes.
We don't actually have any video, so you can't actually see this, but...
Yes, I have a gigantic ogre box I'm holding up. It's quite large. I would drop it to let you hear how big it is, but that would be bad.
Sacrilege.
I also have one of these over in my nerd cave.
It's a beautiful thing.
It is.
It's hard to haul your board game, your single board game.
You need like a forklift.
There are scenarios where you can play Ogre with more than 2 players, but I think quintessentially it's a 2-player game. And I think it's particularly fun because it's got one of those things that I personally think makes strategy games interesting, where both sides are very, very mismatched in terms of their capabilities. Like, they're balanced in terms of, like, their power and overall, gameplay, but they play very, very differently. And another thing that I think makes Ogre interesting is a plague among strategy games everywhere, I think, is, the good old classic rule of the defense has an advantage. Ogre, I think, the attack it has an advantage. So you can't turtle. You can't hunker down. You have to be very, very proactive on the defense, or the game will not go well for you.
This reminds me of a quote from the classic sci-fi novel The Killing Star. Has either of you read that?
No.
It's about relativistic weapons and how they're basically if you can see someone and you have relativistic weapons, you can kill them. And there's of course it's kind of like this. It's like you're stuck in Central Park at night and you want to get out safely, but you're not sure if when you call out they're a friend or a criminal. So the last thing you want to do is call out and say, I need help. And the second to last thing you want to do is respond to someone who says, I'm a friend. You just want to hunker down and hide or wait till the policeman comes. He goes, except in this case, the night never ends. There's no escape from the park and there are no cops. But Ogre, you can't hunker down. You can't hide. You must act.
But yeah, so I think one of sort of the redeeming characteristics, at least of the one scenario in Ogre that I've played multiple times now, it is sort of like the very, very basic sort of scenario where it's an ogre, which is, this basic giant killer nuclear-powered death robot.
One unit of bad.
That like basically, I think my understanding is we built these ogres. They have an artificial intelligence in them. They caused the apocalypse. We've managed to start to rebuild human society, but there's still these AI-controlled robotic death machines just sort of wandering the countryside, and every now and then you have to fight one off.
Just from, fiction and examples, you'd think we would have stopped robotics research, a lot earlier and been like, you know what? None of this has turned out well in any fiction we've written. We want to reconsider this. That's unfair. There's actually plenty of friendly robots in fiction too, but go on.
But yeah,
don't worry. The scientists will trudge on and they will push the button, the big red button, every time.
Great.
But basically, for this one scenario, though, it's you get a list of units for the defense. Ordinarily, you get like a score, and then you use that to buy units. But this simplifies it even more. So it's like, okay, these are the units you have. Place them, and there's particular rules for where on the map you can place them. And then the attacking player gets an ogre. And one unit, one ogre. Because that's all you need. And basically the ogre is trying to destroy the command base. But to, like, win the game, the ogre has to destroy it and then exit the map.
Ah.
And but still, as long as they destroy it, they win. They just don't, like, win plus.
I see.
And basically every game I've played, I've been showing someone else how to play it. And so I've always been playing the defense. And I've still always managed to not 100% succeed at the game. The last game of this I played, I just have to tell the story because I think it's hilarious. So the ogre, you can target its weapons to disable them. And so my strategy was basically like, okay, I am just going to take out all of its weapons, and then basically just keep staying a safe distance so it can't ram me, and just taking it out once all of the weapons are gone. So anyway, I managed to take out all of the weapons, and I think the thing I needed to do was then immediately, instead of trying to kill it, start firing on its treads to slow it down. Because it turns out that it can actually ram any unarmored target and automatically kill it.
Huh.
And my command center is an unarmored target.
Oh dear.
So literally, it had no weapons, it just ran over my command center and then just started driving off the map.
When you're a gigantic AI super killer tank, that's a valid strategy. This did remind me, though, as much as I like minis, I almost forgot to mention there is another 2-player game I want to talk about.
Oh?
This is very late. The Duke. It is.
I'm pretty sure I've heard of this game.
It's from Catalyst Games, and it is a 2-player chess-like game, except...
So Catalyst, like the Shadowrun people?
Yes.
Okay.
So you get a duke, which is your important piece, and you get 2 pawns, basically. And you get every turn, you can either draw a new piece out of a bag and place it adjacent to your duke, wherever they currently are located, or you can move a piece. However, every piece is a tile with 2 sides. The movement patterns are different, so whenever you move it, you have to flip it over. So your initial piece moves in a 1 forward, 1 back, 1 left, 1 right. That's a pawn. But when you move it and flip it, it moves on the diagonals instead. And because all the pieces are like that, you have a lot of tricky maneuvering to kind of get things in the right place.
That seems different.
Yeah, it's kind of a chessy style game that's not as formalized as chess, and there's a bit of luck in terms of what you draw into, and there's just more movement flexibility because there's jumps. More pieces have jumps. Some pieces have remote kills; they can just strike from a distance.
That's cool.
Some pieces have like a rook's slide, except a jump. They can literally just anywhere in this row. I can just suddenly appear and kill something.
Jetpack.
It's the assassin. It's an amazingly fun piece. It's like, oh, you thought you were safe and protected? You're dead. Boom.
So I just feel like if I cannot remember the name of this game, I'm just going to refer to it as 4-dimensional hyper chess.
Okay, sounds good. I like it.
So I know we have gone long on this episode.
There's still one game I want to talk about before we're completely finished.
Okay, this is like 2-hour long episode, everyone. Just
this is
word
a special
warning.
edition. So have either of you ever played Hive?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I totally forgot about it.
Yeah.
You own a copy of this, and I've played it with you.
It's one of my favorite... It's probably my favorite what I would call a chess-like game in the sense that you are provided with a set number of starting pieces. You place them one at a time, and there's sort of an implicit hexagonal grid. You have to place your queen by a certain turn, and then pieces move around, but only touching the cluster of pieces that you've put down so far. And some can move on top of it, some can jump over them, some can move all around them. And the objective is to surround the queen. And it plays... it doesn't play like chess in any mechanical way, but it plays like chess in the sense that you are constantly calculating every possible movement that your opponent could make.
So the game I feel like it plays like is Othello, or Reversi, or whatever it's called.
That's actually not a bad example, because it is about like you get that right placement, the whole stretch can suddenly fall into your control. I hate grasshoppers in that game so much.
So much.
Grasshoppers.
Beetle chase.
But yeah, so it's a fun game. I've played a few times with Rob, and the main takeaway, I think it's a fun game. I enjoy it, but the main thing I took away from it is Rob is much better at it than I am.
Yeah,
you'll have that. I think you'll have that frequently the first several times you play basically any game with an experienced player, though. So sort of like actually the one game that I kind of wanted to wrap up with, assuming we can get around to wrapping up. I'd like to do that relatively shortly because I am going to edit this. So I think for these long episodes, I'm going to have to charging these other two guys a tax or something.
All right. I'll start singing.
So the last game I wanted to talk about is a game called Jaipur, which because I am so dedicated to this podcast, I went out and bought last week, which is actually a complete lie. It's not because of my dedication to this podcast. It's because I'm using this podcast as an excuse to go out and buy new games. If I'm going to be
indistinguishable.
real. So basically, the reason I bought this game was because I feel like when people are talking to like nerdy people on the internet, a question that gets asked a lot is, I want to play board games with my spouse. What are some good two-player games? Which is kind of why I wanted to just generally talk, the three of us about two-player games with no particular rhyme or reason.
Sure.
But so one of the games that I feel like gets mentioned every time this question comes up is this game I had never played before called Jaipur. And I think one of the people who recommended it was Will Wheaton, who you might remember as having played Weston Smasher from Star Wars. So Jaipur is a resource collection and trading game where it's only for two players, and you can, on each of your turn, you can do one of two things. You can either take cards or play cards. You play cards in sets of at least two, sharing a particular color. And you can take cards from the marketplace either one at a time, replacing them from the deck, or as many cards as you want from the market, replacing them with cards from your hand, or you can take all of the camels. Camels are useful because they have no other utility other than being played, from your hand, or they don't actually count towards your hand limit. They live in your herd. You can use the camels to get whatever resources you want in that exchange from the market. So that's sort of the motivation for picking camels. You also get 5 points at the end of the round if you have the most camels. So the cool thing I really like about this game that I didn't actually know going into it, it has an economy with diminishing returns. And it implements it in a way that I think is really cool because it doesn't involve any work on the players other than sorting some fiddly bits correctly. And so basically, when you play a set of cards, depending on what goods you sold, determines which stack of tiles you take. You take from the stack of tiles of the corresponding color. And the ones on top are worth more than the ones on bottom. So some of the less valuable resources, like the very first one is still worth like 5 points, at the end of the game, but immediately under that 5, there's a 3, and then it just quickly goes down, and most of that stack is worth 1. So it gives you a whole bunch of interesting options. Like, one thing you can do to try and score highly is collect a whole bunch of one resource, because you get bonus points the bigger your set is that you play. But also, you can try and play a whole bunch of smaller sets from each of the different resources and try and get to them before your opponent. And that's, because then you get the extra points from that top tile that's usually worth more than all of the tiles below it. So it's super fast-paced. For a 2-player game, it has 3 rounds, so it's actually a best of 3. So if one player wins the first 2 rounds, then you don't even have to finish the third one. So I'd say it easily fits in under half an hour for 2 players. My only 2 criticisms of the game would be, I feel like for such a fast-paced game, you have to invest quite a bit of time into arranging those fiddly bits.
That's a bit of a pain.
It's not a huge amount of time either. It's just relative to how quick the game is.
Gotcha.
I see.
Because it's still pretty easy to set them up. It just feels like, oh, this game was going like at this really fast, fun, exciting rate. Oh, but now I have to pause to sort all of these tiles back into order. So I think it sort of interrupts itself like that, and that's a little unsatisfying, but overall, not a huge demerit. I think the rulebook also leaves a little bit to be desired, because I'm pretty sure, despite the fact it's basically a card game about making sets, I don't think it ever actually uses the word set to describe this, so it's a bit awkward. But anyway, it's a fun game. I would personally recommend it as a fun, fast, easy, simple 2-player game. I don't think it ousts Carcassonne for me as being like the easy transition into ultimate nerdery, but still I feel like Jaipur is easily playable for someone who isn't an out-and-out board game geek. So.
Cool. I think we've gone over a ton of games this episode, so
Yeah.
hopefully our hypothetical audience has heard at least one that sounded interesting, if not like 9.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is also like I guess it's sort of fair that we're delivering this much content, because looking at our Libsyn archive page, our last podcast episode went up on May 19th.
Yes, I apologize, hypothetical audience. I am horrifyingly unorganized. Hard to get in one place.
But
our lengthy delay and hiatus is all Rob's fault.
It is pretty much entirely my fault.
It's all because he loves his family more than us.
Yep.
And is going to spend time with them.
that is a terrible thing. Many people have
I am
loved
a
their family.
horrifying person.
Some of those people who love their family were bad. You could be one of those people. I'm not making any claims. I'm just saying.
But all right, so anyway, we're looking at our raw record time here, we are now reaching the hour and a half mark. So this
World
is
record longest episode.
So this is it's gonna edit down to less than that, but not by a whole lot, because while we are not the most eloquent speakers, the vast majority of our dialogue isn't us making non-word mouth noises.
Yeah, those non-word mouth noises.
So, nonetheless, I hope that all of our hypothetical listeners have a wonderful time until the next time we come together and meet again to have mostly tangential conversations unrelated to the topic at hand.
And I'll review the 2017 Magic set.
Yes.
Yep. So, I have been Andy.
I have been Rob.
And I've been Dan.
Have a great interval until we see again.